Black and Latino children are more likely to attend schools with inexperienced teachers, which are then less likely to offer
$23 billion. That is how much more money majority white school districts receive in contrast to majority minority districts. This statistic highlights just one of the many racial inequities in our nation's public schools. Racial inequities have been occurring in the United States since its birth. From 1776 until the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865, slavery was a harsh reality for most African Americans in the United States. Unfortunately, the racial inequities between the African Americans and their white counterparts would not end with the end of slavery in 1865. Instead, preserved racist sentiments within our country have kept racial minorities at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder for the entirety of American history. And so many of these racial inequities are fueled by America's current public education system and boil down to the differences of funding schools received. While states and counties have attempted to address this issue on a local level, it is necessary for the federal government to directly address this issue in order to create real change. Most students, teachers, and politicians have seen these racial inequities in public schools manifest in various forms.
I was a special education instructional assistant in Montgomery County for a year at the Mark Twain School, which was one of the county's alternative schools. So we received young people from all over the district. I mean, the first sort of stark reality is that, I don't know the actual numbers, but had to be upwards of 80% of the students were children of color.
The data is clear. We have schools that are not equitable in the demographic makeup of the student population and in the socioeconomic resources of the school population as a whole.
Very few school districts were truly integrated. In any case, what we're seeing today are very racially and economically segregated schools.
I would go to a school that has a high concentration of poverty and traditionally see the infrastructure be really, really bad.
There are definitely patterns that we see in terms of how schools are funded.
Our teachers remain underpaid, under-resourced, without the tools that they need to best serve our kids.
There are structures and routines that are in place that even when folks are supposedly behaving in a neutral fashion or supposedly behaving in an objective fashion, the routines and methods by which we make decisions or by which we allocate resources provide favor for some students over others.
In turn, unequal funding directly impacts the quality of education students receive. The National Bureau of Economic Research conducted a study which discovered that the 26 states that have changed their funding have significantly better test scores in comparison to states that have not changed their funding methods.
Our students of color also underperform. So that data is real, and our job as a school system is to understand why that's our current reality and to fix it.
Our hometown of Montgomery County, Maryland is currently undergoing a boundary study that is riling up students, parents, and teachers.
The boundary analysis is just that. It's a boundary analysis to see what is the utilization of our 200 plus school buildings, what's the geographic configuration and adjacency of schools, and what does the level of poverty in a school or the level of racial or cultural diversity in a school look like.
This boundary analysis is just an analysis, but I do predict that the data will tell us what we've always known.
It's an opportunity for us to correct a lot of historical inequities.
It's just a practical reality. When a school system grows by this much, you have to at least look at it.
I also know it is politically challenging. Because then you're turning this not just into a theoretical conversation about what would the ideal situation be, but you're talking to people about where their kids get to go to school and who they'll be going to school with.
So the premise behind most of these boundary analyses is about moving the students and shuffling the bodies, but not actually dealing with the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is that the schools will never be integrated if the neighborhoods aren't truly integrated.
We see the divides over racial inequities occurring in our community as a microcosm for the divides occurring all across the United States.
The boundary analysis is one way that Montgomery County Public Schools are trying to combat the previously described racial inequities in education. Some people think that all jurisdiction over education should belong to states and local government.
For too long, the federal government has imposed its will on state and local governments. The result has been education that spends more and achieves far, far, far less.
We believe that efforts taken by state and local governments like the Boundary Study in Montgomery County are only somewhat effective in correcting racism within schools. The federal government needs to take action in combating racial inequities across the country.
If I had the opportunity to talk to a presidential candidate, or really any policymaker, about addressing racial inequities in education, I think the first thing that I would suggest is that they talk about it.
The advice I would have for anybody who's going to become president in 2020, in terms of education, is to listen to teachers, because we know what's going on.
You have to think beyond that singular system if you really want to have an impact.
I believe that we need to operationalize the inclusion of students in that decision-making process. And so nationally, that's what I would tell the next president.
I will be looking for a president with the goal of making America's schools more equitable in order to better serve our nation's children and future.